So in the planning module, we have covered in general how the project management plan is needed and created, and then we talked about scope management and scope planning, basically, not fully the scope management, scope planning. And today we are talking about schedule plan. Okay. So if it is a predictive project, we have our scope of work. We need to plan our activities and we need to come out of some idea of how much time it will take to complete all of these activities. So scope of work will tell us what needed to be done to produce, and what needed to be done need to be estimated. But it all depends on who will do it. So
Mm,
because an experienced resource will get the job done faster. On the other hand, junior resource will take more time. But if we look at the experienced resource, it will cost us more, and a junior resource will cost us less. So there is always a trade-off that you will try to save time, but you will incur more cost. Makes sense, right?
yes.
Now, when we will identify various activities needed to be done in a project, these activities might have dependencies on each other. Okay. Like when we
Mm,
let's take an example of planting a tree or planting a tree. Yeah. So you need to dig a hole and then plant the seeds. I mean, the roots, the tree itself, right? So it
yeah.
means that there are two activities, both are dependent on each other. First, we need to dig a hole and then we need to plant a tree, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Similarly, for the building, if you need to erect a building, you need to first dig a hole, I mean the basement, and then you need to build the basement, then you will build the building on top of the base. So there are always
Mm,
dependencies, and
correct.
no matter what are the activities needed to be done, but each activity will take some amount of time. So we know now there is one thing that we need to do is the identify the activity which needed to be done, and then another thing which we need to do is to know the duration of that activity. And another thing which we need to do it is that find the dependencies between these activities. So if I make an Excel sheet, it will be easy for you to understand it. So imagine that deliverable A is what we need to produce. And we know that work package A is what we need to do. And it is not only work package A, it may be work package B and work package C that need to be done. Make sense?
Mm,
So let's say, and each work package might have further activities under it, right?
yes.
Activity one, activity. So you see, so this is how we know our work breakdown structure. Work is breaking down, right?
Mm,
So it was deliverable. Let's say this was project. Okay? So this is, if this is a case of one deliverable, imagine, right? Then there could be another deliverable, right? So now we broke down, we decomposed a project into deliverables. We further decompose deliverables into work packages. Make sense?
yes, makes sense.
And then we further broke down each work package into smaller activities. And this continues for deliverable 2 as well. Now, these activities 1 and 2 and 3 do not necessarily have finish to start relation, that first you finish activity 1, then you will start 2 and so on, right? It's not always like a sequence, right? It's not always like this. You will work on activity 1 and then you will work on activity 2 and then you will work on activity 3, right?
I
It
see.
could be activity 3 is the one which need to be done first, and then activity 1 which is needed to be done second. So what we need to know is the dependencies between these activities. Okay, what we
Okay.
need to know is the dependencies between these activities. Where is this? Yeah, so these activities might be dependent on each other. Okay. So if we have this relationship, okay, so each activity, now we know the activity, right? We know let's say we know the activity, we identify the activity. Now we need to know the dependency between these activities, and we need to know the duration of each activity. Okay. This is the information of the project that we have during the initiation. Deliverable is through the scope management, we identified what deliverables needed to be produced. And during the scope management, we identified the work package, right?
Mm,
So this was
right.
this was the initiation, and even high level deliverables was during the initiation. And then we have the scope management properly done, scope planning, in which we created the WBS. And then remember that WBS will not have the activity. It is only project schedule which will have these activities. Okay. So this
Okay.
is project schedule. Now that's why we are saying we are studying the scheduling. Now in the scheduling, what do we need? In the scheduling, we need to identify dependencies, and estimate the duration. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
So if we know all these three things, we are sorted. We are sorted. We can manage this schedule to completion. Only thing we would need is the resource then, that who will do the work, right?
Right.
It is manpower. Let's say if this activity is taking down or taking up a heavy material on the 10th floor of the building. Now, this need to be done. This can be done by machine or manpower, right? Manpower or machine, right? Now, what is the risky way is the manpower, right? What is the safe way is the machine, the crane. But how much time it will take if a man will do, it may take one full day, right? But if machine does, maybe it takes 1 hour. So faster and safer machine, right? And this activity might have some dependency as well. Maybe activity 3 would be dependent on activity 1. Like activity 3 need to be done first and then activity 1 will be done. So dependencies could be like this. Which one is first and which one is second, right?
Right.
So the order could be that do an activity 3, then activity 5, then 2, then 1. So like this. So the actual order could be like this, right? So it was not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's actually first 3 need to be done, then 5, then 1, then 2, then 6, then, right? Okay. So let's go back. So what is the role of project manager in scheduling? Project manager ensures that the work package is broken down into required activities. So this is what you have seen, right? Where you have seen here, right? You have broken down the work packages into activities, correct?
Right.
Right? Okay. Then what else? Dependencies and precedence relationships are determined. So this is when you have done here, right? Make sense?
Yeah.
Which one is first, which one is second, right? True?
True. Right.
Yeah. And activity durations are estimated. Okay. So this is what you have done here. Duration estimate makes sense. And what else? The critical path is determined. So here we have determined the critical path. How? This is our critical path. That activity, I'll show you. If this is start, then, and this is end, so this is your critical path. Let's say this takes 1 day, this takes 2 days, this takes 3 days, this takes 2 days, this takes 1 day, this takes one. So no matter what happens, activity 3 should not take more than a day. Activity 5 has to start on the second day, should not take more than 2 days. Activity 1 should not take 3 days. Activity 2 should not take 2 days. More than 2 days should not take. So what is the duration? The duration is 10 days is the minimum duration in which, let's say if this was the full project, let's say we are saying that's it. There is only one work package. Okay. Let's say hide this. So from start till finish, how much time needed to be is needed to make sure all these activities are completed is the 10 days, right? True? You're with me?
How is it 10 days?
Yeah, so I will merge it so that now let's say activity 5 got delayed and it got delayed by a day. Okay.
Yeah.
So there is a delay. What happened? That the whole project got delayed by 1 day. Now the project is duration is 11 days. True?
Yes.
So you determine the critical path. To determine the critical path, you need to know what are the critical activities and what is the duration. What is the duration of each of these activities? So the definition of critical path is the path which is longest in the duration. Okay, from start to finish, which is the longest in the duration. Okay, and which is the minimum time needed to complete your project. Now, had I made this like this from start to finish, had I made it like this, that you do activity 1 and you do activity 2, sorry, you do activity 3 and you do activity 1 and then you do activity 4. So this was start and this was plan. So remaining activities, let's say activity 1 was, activity 5 was here, let's say activity 2 was here and activity 6. So this was like this and then like this. Understanding, right?
Yes.
Like this and then okay. So if there were two paths, path 1 and part 2. This is part 1 and this is part 2. Now we know activity 3 is for 1 day, activity 1 is for 3 days, activity 4 is for 1 day. And let's say activity 5 is for 2 days. Okay. And let's say activity 2 is for 2 days. And let's say activity 6 is for one. Now what's happening here is the following. What is the duration of this path? 4 days, 5 days, right? 1, 3, 1. What is the duration of this path? 5 days, right? So Both
Yeah.
are critical path. Both are critical path. Any delay in activity, any of these activities, any delay in any of these activities will delay the. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
Now, if this was not the case, let's say the activity 5 was 4 days. That's it. Activity 5 was 4 days. Now, what will happen? The critical path will change. The critical path will be this bold one, not getting bold, right? So, the part 2 will be your critical path. Okay. Makes sense, right?
Yes.
Because I told you the longest path in the network is your critical path, right? From start to finish, the longest path. This one is the longest path. 4 plus 2 plus 1. Now it is 7 days. So path 2 is the longest path. That's why it will be the critical path. Now, why the concept of critical path is because the critical path actually helps us to determine the duration of the project. The whole project will be finished in as minimum as 7 days, because in this 7 days we are pretty sure that all the other activities will be completed. Now once we will be working on activity 3, in a day it will finish, but we will start activity 1 because activity 1 is in a finish to start relationship with activity 3. As soon as activity 3 will finish, activity 1 can be started, right? There is no other dependence. Now, meanwhile, when I was working on 1, activity 5 was also in parallel, it also got started. But 1 finished, activity 3 got finished in after day 1. However, activity 5 was yet to be 3 days remaining, right? 1 day passed. What I did, I
Yes.
started activity 1 and activity 1 took 3 days. Meanwhile, activity 5 will also finish, correct?
Correct.
Now, it means that 5 took as much time as 3 and 1 took. Then I will transition to activity 2 and I will transition to activity 4. Okay. So people on activity 4 will start the work and people on activity 2 will start the work. There is no other dependence. Meanwhile, activity 2 is being finished. Activity 4 will finish after day 1 day. So 1 day still will be remaining and activity 2 will be in progress. And then what will happen? This guy already reached to the end, right? But the end is also dependent on the completion of activity 6, which actually has not started because it is dependent on completion of activity 2. So activity 2 will finish after one more day and then activity 6 will take another day and then project will end. Make sense? Now if you delay activity 3 by 1 day, what will happen? Nothing, because still this is 6 days and actual duration of the project is 7 days. So if we can say, so can we say that activity 3 has a float of a day, right? Or actually there is 2 days of float available. I can delay it to 3. Now what will happen? 3 days pass, 3 days pass, 6. In this time, both of these activities will finish and both of these activities will finish. Now there is no more room. In next 1 day, both of these activities should finish. So now again the situation is both of these are the critical paths, right? So initially there was a float available. So float is the amount of time we can delay an activity, okay, without delaying the project end date, right? So we could delay either activity 3 by 1 day, 2 day, or activity 1 by 1 day or 2 day, or activity 4 by 1 day or 2 day, right? Without delaying the end date of the project, correct? So there was a 2 day float available for either of these activities, correct? But the float of activity 5, 2 and 6 was 0 always, because this is critical path. So any activity which is on critical path, the float is always 0. Float is like free float, like the activity can linger around and it can delay the start date of the activity or the finish date of an activity, because we know in the bigger picture we have time, right? For activity 3 and 1 and 4 to sequentially finish, they are actually estimated to finish in 4 days or 5 days, but we know that we have 2 more days of float available, so there could be some buffer we can utilize on these activities. But is there any buffer on activity 5, 2 and 6? The answer is no. You got it, Abil? Difficult?
No, it's not.
Okay, true. Cool. Let's go. What methods can be? Okay, so yeah, we were here, the critical path. So we determined the critical path. Now, resource allocations, as I told you, it all depends on a resource as well, right? So the project manager has to decide who will do the job, right? And then what, as a project manager, you also do is the compression to meet the constraints. For example, I told you initially that you have 7 days to finish this project, but I came back to you and told you you have only 6 days. So my new constraint is finish the project in 6 days. So what you need to do, let's say 4 days. Let's say I say the new constraint is that new deadline is that you need to finish this project in 4 days. So you have what options you have for schedule compression? You have two options. Either you can do fast tracking, or you can do crashing, or you can do crashing. So what are these concepts? If you have sequenced the activities which were initially, if you have changed the dependencies between the activities which were initially planned in a sequence, you replan those activities to be done in parallel. Like the way here, Forget about this delay, and imagine this is the scenario that initially all these activities were planned to be done in a sequence, okay? And we have a finish to start relationship. So we will not be able to start activity 5 until we are finished activity 3. Similarly, will not be able to start activity 1 until we are done with activity 5, and so on. So which means that the whole duration of the project was actually 1 plus 2, 3 plus 3, 6 plus 3, 9 plus 1, 10 days, right? Initially, this project would take 10 days, but we compress this schedule in the following way, that we have done this. That the activities which were originally planned in sequence, the activity 3 and 5 which were originally planned in a sequence, the activity 1 and 2 which were originally planned in a sequence, and the activity 6 and 4 which were originally planned in the sequence, right? What did we do? We changed the dependencies between these activities. Now these are being done in parallel, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So this means that the method that in which we change the dependencies between the activities which were originally planned to be done in a sequence, we do these activities in parallel to compress the schedule. Schedule compression made this schedule to for 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1 plus 1 was actually 10 days. Now this without schedule compression, right? This was original. Now with fast tracking, what happened? What happened? With fast tracking, now this can be done in 7 days, because we know activity 5, and so it will be like this, 4 plus 2 plus. So now this is actually what happened is the schedule compression through fast track. Schedule compression through fast tracking. Now crashing means what? Crashing means, let's say an activity was had to take 4 days. Activity 5 need to take 4 days, and one resource is working on this activity. Let's say this activity is the offloading of a truck, and the truck has a lot of timber inside it, and one guy is there. He works 8 hours a day, and he has, let's say, 4 days has been estimated that he will be able to offload the truck. Now if we need to compress the schedule further, let's say we deploy another resource with resource A, we deploy another resource. So now originally if it had to take 4 days, it will take 2 days, right?
Right.
So now with compression, so with further, what is happening with compression, sorry, with the schedule compression through crashing, what are we doing? We are deploying more resources to get the job done even faster. So this job will be done by 2 people, but it will take now 2 days. So now the schedule is further compressed to 5 days. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yalla, I think enough for you. Okay, so you learned
Okay.
today how a schedule is created, how activities are identified, dependencies are determined, and critical path method, how we determine the critical path, what is the significance of critical path, how a schedule can be compressed, what is fast tracking, what is crash. Any questions?
So how for this section of the resources, how
That
does it
is,
determine?
yeah, now the resources for time being, you just identify, keep in mind that every activity there is a resource. Okay. It could be an in-house manpower, it could be an outsourcing agency which will provide the manpower. It could be material, equipment, anything. Okay. But that resource management or staffing the project is another area which we'll study further, right? But for the time being, we just keep in mind that someone will do it, right? And that someone will have an hourly charge, right? Make sense?
It makes sense. So it does not match with the various activity, activity 3, 5.
It might, sorry.
It does not match. with this activity? There's no correlation.
No, there is. There is. For example, the resource working on activity A takes a sick leave. So, sorry,
Mm,
this is activity 3. Okay. So the project was starting on day 1, and we found out that activity 3 is, so the resource working on activity 3, manpower, is sick today. So
mm,
we will either we should have an alternate, right? Someone should cover up for him or her, or we will have to wait for another day to for the resource to come back, right? So that's a typical project management scenario. So that's why I told you, do we have a float available on this activity 3? No matter what contingency is there, right? No matter what will happen, maybe the resource is sick, or maybe the resource has resigned, or whatever, a resource is not available, right? Or is taken up by another project which is more important, whatever. So the day is gone. So do we have, can we afford this delay on activity 3? Yes, because this is not a critical activity. But had it the situation with activity 5, we could not afford it unless we delay a project by a day, right?
right.
So it is not the activity which is critical. Remember, it is the resource working on the activity which will make this activity critical or not critical. Make sense?
Makes sense.
Any more question?
No, no, sir.
So let's stop the recording.